Hello and welcome to the PBIS and de-escalation overview for classified staff. My name is Kenya McCoy and I'm a behavior resource teacher for the JCPS Culture and Climate Department. And I'm here with my colleague, Dr. Victoria Ligon.
Hello, everyone.
And she serves as the department coach for our team. And we will be your presenters for this training. Here are our learning targets for today. You will be able to define PBIS, identify key PBIS features. You will be able to name the functions of behavior and describe the physiology of the body during escalation. And lastly, you will be able to identify tips for de-escalation, for de-escalating an individual. So we'll go ahead and start with the PBIS features. School-wide positive behavior interventions and supports, or PBIS, is a systems approach to establishing the social, culture, and behavioral supports needed for all children in a school to achieve both social and academic success. And so let's look at the PBIS journey. Starting with why, the purpose of PBIS is to improve the effectiveness, efficiency, and equity of schools and other agencies. PBIS improves social, emotional, and academic outcomes for all students, including students with disabilities and students from underrepresented groups. When implemented correctly, PBIS promotes a more positive school climate, safer learning environments, and more trusting and respectful student-teacher relationships. And the primary focus of PBIS is prevention and not punishment. So let's look at the who. So a school-based PBIS team will collaborate with staff, students, families, and members of the community to solve problems. And then lastly, the how. PBIS systems include behavior expectations, both school-wide and in individual classrooms, reward systems, data to inform decisions, and evaluation of support systems. So PBIS is a multi-tiered system of support centered on behavior to improve outcomes for all students. Multi-tiered systems of support, or MTSS, emerged as a framework from the work conducted in public health, emphasizing 3 tiers of prevention. Schools apply this model as a way to align to academic, behavioral, social, and emotional supports to improve education for all students. The 3-tiered model incorporates increasing intensities of instruction, offering specific research-based interventions matched to student needs. So Tier 1 supports serve as the foundation for behavior and academics. Schools provide these universal supports to all students. For most students, the core program gives them what they need to be successful and to prevent future problems. This level of support focuses on improving specific skill deficits students have. Students may need some assessment to identify whether they need this level of support and which skills to address. It is often estimated that 80% of students will need additional interventions, will not need additional interventions beyond those at Tier 1. However, if less than 80% of students are succeeding in Tier 1, then the Tier 1 instruction needs to be strengthened. So Tier 2 are targeted support groups of students that help to develop the skills they need to benefit core programs at the school. It typically consists of between 10% to 15% of students. In Tier 2, students not making adequate progress in the core curriculum are provided with increasingly intensive instruction matched to their needs on the basis of levels of performance and rates of progress. Lastly, Tier 3 supports are the most intensive supports the school offers. It consists of highly targeted, individualized, and intensive interventions, and typically consists of between 1% and 5% of students. At this level, schools typically rely on formal assessments to determine the student's needs and to develop an individualized support plan. So the PBIS team helps to drive initiatives forward, both school-wide and at the classroom level. Their efforts are crucial to the success of PBIS in schools. And usually PBIS teams meet at least once a month with a set agenda and defined roles. This would be a great opportunity for classified staff to add any input regarding student behavior. A PBIS team will usually create an action plan with goals, activities, and who is responsible for various tasks at the beginning of the year. This drives the work of the PBIS team, and teams can review and make changes to the plan throughout the year. One of the most basic duties of the action plan is to establish a school-wide behavior matrix. A school-wide student behavior expectation matrix explains what an expectation is like in common areas. So here's an example of a school-wide expectation matrix. Along one axis are the expectations, while the other axis includes locations in which these behaviors are expected. The matrix is used to directly teach positive behavioral expectations and is posted as a visual reminder to students and staff throughout the specific locations in the school. As you can see across the top axis there, hallways, cafeteria, playground, carpool area, assemblies, or restroom. A school-wide system of values sets the foundation for a community of shared expectations for behavior of students and adults. These expectations guide all aspects of the school's operation in and out of classrooms, including interactions amongst students, between students and teachers, transitions between classrooms, and behavior in public area spaces. A school-wide value such as be respectful, for example, would be used to help students and teachers establish a common understanding of how to work collaboratively in a group during class and communicate when feeling frustrated. All students and adults are responsible for following and reinforcing these values through their behaviors. And so students and teachers are motivated to uphold school-wide values, systems, and routines when they explicitly reinforce a school culture that fosters a positive learning environment and strong relationships. So the focus of these routines is less on compliance or following rules and more about how to sustain a culture that is valued by everyone. This helps students feel safe, cared for, and respected, and minimizes teacher and administrator time on redirecting behavior. Fewer behavior referrals to the main office result in more instructional time for more students and make it easier for students and teachers to focus on learning. It's also important to define what teachers are expected to do so there are no confusion about what staff should be doing to support students. For example, during a transition in a secondary setting, all teachers would be expected to provide active supervision by standing in the doorway as students transition from one class to another. And the same would apply for elementary teachers during a wellness block. We cannot assume that students know what the expectations are in school. They need to be explicitly taught and reviewed often. Direct instruction on respectful behavior helps students follow the expectations. So here's what the instruction might look like. So teachers would introduce the expectation and give the rationale. And schools may emphasize one expectation a week for the first several weeks of the school year. Then they would provide clear examples of respectful and disrespectful behavior, and then model desired behaviors for students, pointing out key features. Then teachers would have students practice the behaviors through role play and then give them immediate feedback. They would keep cueing and prompting appropriate behavior inside and outside of the classroom. An example would be, remember the 4 cafeteria expectations: stay seated, stay in self space, use inside voices, and keep clean. So the Greek philosopher Aristotle once commented on the importance of repetition in education by noting, "It is frequent repetition that produces a natural tendency." Repetition is a key learning aid because it helps transition a skill from the conscious to the subconscious. Through repetition, a skill is practiced and rehearsed over time and gradually becomes easier. As the student improves, he or she does not need to think consciously about the skill, freeing up mental resources to learn new skills and concepts. So, how many repetitions do you think it takes for a child to learn something new? If you said 8, you guessed correctly. And it takes 25 repetitions for an adult to learn something new. So that definitely shows us that repetition is extremely important for learning new skills. In PBIS, it is very important to define behaviors because what one teacher may consider disrespectful may not be disrespectful to another teacher. Also, staff likely experience varied tolerance levels for different types of behaviors. So, also to develop a consistent environment, it is important to encourage commitment to a common message around these behaviors. And also, in order to achieve a commonality of approach to discipline behaviors, they need to be operationally defined. And so here is a way that schools can define behavior in PBIS. The following chart defines what behaviors will be handled by the school office and by the classroom teacher. So the teacher-managed behaviors involve opportunities for teachable moments and minimizing interruption to instruction. So some examples would be talking during class, out of the seat, or even pencil tapping. While office managed behaviors involve school incidents that affect students' physical and or emotional safety. So they are a little bit more serious. And some examples would be bullying, vandalism, or cursing at staff. So teachers are encouraged to try a variety of classroom management strategies, especially when they are trying to manage behaviors in the classroom. And there are 6 classroom management practices that utilize PBIS elements and offer preventative and appropriate ways to respond to problem behaviors. They are number 1, the classroom teaching matrix with expectations, rules, and routines, arranging the physical environment, active supervision, giving praise for appropriate behavior, the continuum of response strategies for inappropriate behavior, and the number 6, opportunities to respond in academic engagement. Although we will not cover OTRs in this particular training. So let's start with the classroom matrix example. So classroom management is essential from the first day of school to the last. Beginning the year with positive routines and expectations will help to maintain order and allow students to develop as the year progresses. The presence of expectations and routines can help increase instructional time so the student can learn more. With clear, consistent classroom expectations, students know and understand what's expected of them, which gives them confidence. This will help students monitor themselves and take more responsibility for their behavior and for their learning. So just like the school-wide expectations, teachers should create expectations for their classroom that are aligned to school expectations. We want there to be some continuity and some consistency with both the school-wide expectations, which are stated here as an example: be responsible, be respectful, and be safe, and then align them to the school-wide or the classroom expectations. And then the classroom expectations should also describe what students will do or say in observable terms. For example, be respectful in group work by listening to your peers take turns speaking. We also want them to be posted publicly so that all students can see them, no matter where they are in the classroom, and they should be developmentally appropriate. So kindergarten expectations may look a little bit different from fifth grade classroom expectations. And then lastly, they should apply to all areas of the classroom. During the welcome, when at the beginning of class, during group work, expectations should define when someone is upset or during any transition time. So this will cover all opportunities for students to follow expectations no matter what's going on in the classroom. So our second classroom managed behavior strategy is arranging the physical environment. So the physical structure of a classroom is a critical variable in affecting student morale and learning. Students' involvement in the process of creating their environment can also empower them, develop community, and increase motivation. So the traffic patterns should always be clearly defined and allow movement without disrupting others. Staff and students should have easy access to enter or exit the classroom, definitely free of clutter, especially for safety issues if there's a fire drill. Teachers should also employ active supervision, which means moving and circulating through all parts of the classroom using close proximity to students needing additional support. So we're going to talk a little bit more about active supervision for our next classroom management strategy. Active supervision is a proactive strategy to reduce problem behaviors in schools. Active supervision creates opportunities for teachers to interact with students, to provide preventative praise and supervision, and provide corrective feedback to monitor behaviors prior to significant escalations. And there are three components to active supervision. So first, there's moving throughout the space. That's using proximity by continuously moving throughout the learning environment to monitor, support, be present. You don't just want to stay in one place or sit at the desk, but you want to be continually moving around the classroom. Second, scanning where you are visually sweeping areas to monitor them, to prevent or even reinforce good behavior, or if students need to be corrected in their behavior. And then the last component is interacting. That is where you are providing feedback to students to reinforce, prevent, or teach academic and behavioral skills. And that's also the time where you can develop relationships with students informally, asking them how their day is going, what did they do over the weekend. This time is a great way to just connect with students and build relationships with them. So our next classroom management strategy is feedback and acknowledgement. When a student is doing well, it's so important to acknowledge this through words or gestures. Positive reinforcement help children build self-esteem and encourage them to continue with desired behavior. It's vital to recognize and reinforce the specific behavior and not the child. So feedback is any response regarding a student's performance or behavior. It can be verbal, written, or gestural. Research consistently has shown that systematic correction of student academic and social behavior errors and performance feedback have a positive effect on behavior. So providing feedback means giving students an explanation of what they are doing correctly and incorrectly, with the focus of the feedback on what the student is doing right. It is most productive to a student's learning when they are provided an explanation as to what is accurate and inaccurate about their work or behavior. The way you speak with a child can affect how the child responds. It's easier to avoid power struggles and get compliance from a child if you give directions in a clear, direct, and specific fashion, using as few words as possible and provide a reasonable amount of time to comply or wait time. You may encourage power struggles and disrespectful behavior when the feedback is vague or sarcastic or overly wordy. So teachers should strive to use 4 positive feedback and acknowledgement statements to 1 corrective statement. And one technique to use is the concept of a feedback sandwich to guide your feedback, where you give a compliment, then correct, and then a compliment. And you would be doing this throughout the day to get the ratio of 4 to 1. So teachers and staff members should be prepared to catch students being good and reinforce the positive behaviors they see. So these are some ways to provide specific praise or behavior. You can identify the student or group, acknowledge specific behavior or the rule. You want to link it to school-wide expectations, and you can give a tangible reinforcement or even a verbal one. And so schools should have lots of different ways to acknowledge positive behaviors. And also some other suggestions for rewards are tokens or tickets that students can trade for special activities and small prizes. Also, there's public recognition, like a special title or a school announcement can be given to students who demonstrate behaviors outlined in the school-wide expectations or classroom expectations. You could display just display case featuring names and photos of students who are positive behavior superstars, and special social interaction opportunities like eating lunch with a teacher or a principal might be really fun and rewarding for students. But it's also important to note the non-examples as well, like saying good job without connecting to the school-wide expectations. A non-example would be giving tickets without saying anything. You always want to give an explanation as to why the student is receiving this acknowledgement. And then another non-example would be only giving a ticket for above and beyond behavior. You want there to be a variety of opportunities and ways to earn acknowledgement, and that's why you want to connect it to the school-wide behaviors and also the classroom expectations, so that students know how they can earn acknowledgement, and positive feedback. So now we're going to watch a video where a teacher demonstrates how she uses the PBIS 4-to-1 ratio strategy to promote a positive classroom learning environment. Watch as Atali keeps track of her use of positive acknowledgements versus corrective statements during a 7th grade math lesson.
Thank you for coming in quickly and quietly. Quickly and quietly. Good morning. Quickly and quietly. You're fine, Trina. If I didn't say anything to you, you're fine. Quickly and quietly.
I returned it in your box.
I got it. Thank you, Alexis, for getting your pencil out and being ready to go. Thank you. The 4-to-1 ratio for PBIS is 4 positives for every corrective behavior that you do in your classroom. So if I ask a student to stay on task, then I'm going to make sure that I follow that by 4 positives. Thank you for being on task. Thank you for having your pencil. Thank you for eyes on me. Those kinds of compliments that are supporting the positive behaviors that I see with the student. Patiently and calmly, and then come back around and go through the aisles for your circular flow. Yes? Yes. First row, go get your books, please. Just as a reminder, our backpack should be underneath our desks so we don't trip and kill ourselves. We should have our pencils out. Great job, guys. Thank you for making the change. Next row. Tie your shoe, you're gonna break your neck. Hey, thank you everybody for having your pencils today. And those of you who borrowed, I appreciate you borrowing it at the beginning of the period. A positive acknowledgement is when the student is demonstrating a behavior that it's appropriate in class and you want them to continue to exhibiting that behavior. So for example, when the student is staying on task, the student is following instructions, the student is working well with peers or listening, then I can acknowledge that the student is demonstrating that positive behavior in class. I think it's a great spot for us to start. This number and this number. I would define a negative corrective statement as a statement that tells the student that something is amiss. So they're exhibiting some sort of behavior that doesn't fall in line with my expectations in the class. And so I pose this statement so that they can think about what am I doing in my behavior, and so that they can correct it. And then if they correct it, then I can follow it up with something positive and acknowledge that positive correction that they have made. Why is the quotient smaller? Those kinds of questions. Yes, Trina? When do you need to sharpen your pencil, Trina? Is this the beginning of class? No, this is not. So what is your option in regards to pencils? Then do it. Don't talk to me about it. All right, so go ahead and start answering. Then do it. Don't talk to me about it. All right, so go ahead and start answering. Good job. Thank you for starting to write, Trina. I appreciate that. Thank you, Isaiah. You got your piece? Yes. Okay. Thank you. I see Christopher writing. I see people rereading their answer to make sure it makes sense. I think that's a great strategy. I see that everybody's writing, so that's good as well. At this point, do we want all the right answers? Yes or no? What do I want you to do? Try. I want you to at least try, okay? All right, we're finishing up those last pieces. Clap once, clap twice. Thank you. Okay, so now we need to share out. Remember, no opt out. Everyone's going to share. We're going to start with Holly. Understand why 3 when I divide by 3/4 is greater. Well, objective your answer gives me 4. Thank you, you two, for sharing. I do appreciate that. So you understand the questions right here, so good job, but you are missing the part where you're explaining your reasoning. I think that's the piece that we're missing. Hands down, Alexis. Okay, I see that you both had some reasoning there, and I appreciate that. So thank you for sharing. Andrew? Like I draw a picture, and I say there are 4 roots of 3/4 that fit into 3. Yes? Did I say that right?
I didn't write this down, but to divide, you have to make 3 into a improper fraction, and then divide. No, never mind.
Never mind? You're not sure? Thank you for trying. I appreciate you trying, though. Yes. All right, so when we did this last time, we were looking at 3/4 divided by 3, and our answer was what? How do we get 4? That is a great question. All right. So what we did, here's the thing. I want kids to come into my room, and yes, they have to come into my room, but I want them to want to be here. And I want them to feel like I care, because I genuinely do care about how they're feeling in my room. I understand that school is not fun for everyone. It was fun for me, but it may not be fun for all the kids. And so I really feel like by implementing that 4-to-1, I know it sounds silly, but by implementing it, I feel like they feel better about being here. They like coming to a room. I mean, to have middle schoolers smile about coming into a math classroom, that's huge. Like, I couldn't buy that. And I'll use it all the time if that's what it takes. Fourths, right? Because this is asking me about 3/4. So I have 1/4. Actually, I think you're going to like this one helps you guys with that. You guys are almost there. You're talking about multiplying
And then the whole number, you add 1. So it would 2 times 1.
It's okay. Take a deep breath. You're all right. You're doing great.
It said that you would do 2
times the denominator, then 2 plus 1. What it sounds like to me is that you're just trying to change a mixed number to an improper fraction. Okay, so right now the only thing we're discussing is reciprocals. How did I know that? Great question, Hawk. Okay, but we're not looking at this. Okay, so 3/2 times 2/3. What's 3 times 2? Oh, thank you for helping me understand. Yeah, no variables. We are not there. So what they're showing you, and let's get this out of the way. Okay, so what they're showing you first is what we're. Okay, thank you. You very much changed from last time with I don't get it too. I don't exactly get this part. So good job, Hawk. Okay, so first of all, we multiply straight across. All right. So I did not excuse you. Remember, the bell doesn't excuse you. I do. You should have gotten D. You may now pack up group 1. After watching the video, it was very obvious that there are 2 different faces that I use when I'm giving a positive kind of acknowledgement and a corrective kind of statement. I need to work on more of a poker face because I think there is definitely a negative face that I'm giving students when I'm asking them to do something. And of course, I'm smiling when I'm asking them, telling them that they're doing something positive. I also noticed that my voice changes when I'm giving a positive acknowledgement and when I'm giving some corrective statements. I have a little bit more of a harsher tone when I'm giving a corrective statement. And even if I'm trying to say it nicely, I'm definitely saying it different than when I'm giving a positive kind of acknowledgement to students. It was very surprising. I did not notice that. Oh, you take care of that. Thank you so much for making sure those are neat. Jesse, you are a true creature of happiness. When I was being recorded, I did not know that PBIS was the focus of my recording. And so I would assume that during the recording, I really tried to, I didn't think about it, but I'm assuming that it was 3-to-1, 4-to-1. It wasn't something that I was trying to do during the recording, so it wasn't something that I was cognizant of while I was recording, but I'm assuming it was close to 4-to-1.
So I hope this video helped you better understand how to use the 4-to-1 ratio to create a more positive classroom environment. And then one other thing I wanted to note about the video is just how the teacher was able to reflect on her practice. That's such an encouragement to us as Educators, whether we are classified or certified, to reflect on our practice and see what changes needed to be made. And then also I liked how she said that using the strategies were subconscious to her. So we talked about how repetition is so important to move behaviors more to your subconscious. So that's also an encouragement that if we keep using these strategies, they will become second nature to us. So we're going to move on to our last classroom management strategy, which is the continuum of strategies. The continuum of strategies is a tool used to know how to respond to a specific problem behavior. And the continuum includes the definitions of the strategies and aligns them to the JCPS Student Support and Behavior Intervention Handbook, which was formerly the Student Code of Conduct. So we need to be explicit about a continuum of strategies so we are able to correct minor behavior in the classroom before they escalate to major behaviors and cause loss of instructional time. So a continuum of strategies for responding to inappropriate behavior is a critical feature of a comprehensive classroom management plan, and it will help teachers be prepared to deal with problems not meeting their expectations. The corrective strategies should occur on a continuum and are designed to extinguish interfering behaviors and encourage appropriate ones. When utilizing a corrective strategy with a student, teacher responses should be calm, supportive, and solution-focused. The goal of using corrective strategies is to quickly manage minor interfering behaviors while maximizing student engagement and instructional time. So here are some common strategies. The planned ignoring is when you ignore student behaviors when their motivation is attention and they continue instruction without stopping. You don't want to highlight those small behaviors. You just want to keep going with instruction and in hopes that students will not keep misbehaving so that they won't get attention from that. And then physical proximity is when the teacher intentionally moves throughout the classroom in an effort to promote expected student behaviors. So the teacher's proximity to the student serves as a nonverbal redirection to more desirable behavior. The signal nonverbal cue, the teacher gestures to prompt a desired behavior, response, or adherence to a classroom procedure and routine. And then direct eye contact, that's our teacher look, where the teacher look, you look to get attention and then non-verbally prompt a student by looking directly at them. We use that a lot as educators. The praise the appropriate behaviors of others, as when you identify the correct behavior in another student or group and then use their behavior to use behavior specific praise to remind all students of the rule and expectation. And then to redirect, use a brief, private or semi-private, positively phrased statement that reminds the student of the expected behavior. In other words, you state what is expected and not what the student is doing wrong when you redirect. So support for procedures or routine, you identify and install a classroom routine to prevent the problem behavior, and you provide a booster for a routine already in place. And when you reteach, it's like academic instruction. The teacher labels the desired skill, teaches and shows the skill, and then gives the student an immediate opportunity to practice demonstrating the behavior. And then the teacher follows up with immediate descriptive feedback. In differential reinforcement, you are reinforcing one behavior and not the other. For example, you reinforce the positive behavior while ignoring the student's inappropriate behavior. The specific and content error correction, those are specific directions that prompt or alert the student to stop the undesired behavior and then to engage in a more desired behavior. And then providing choice, giving choice to accomplish a task, maybe in another location, like in another classroom. You can give a choice about the order of a task. Maybe they want to complete, a math task before they do a language art class, especially if you're in an elementary classroom. Just giving them some choice so that you don't escalate them if it's appropriate at that time. Another choice is using alternative supplies to complete the task or for a different type of activity that accomplishes the same instructional objective. And choices should lead to the same outcome. And then lastly, conferencing with the student provides a problem-solving opportunity when behavior is more frequent or intense. So you may want to save this one for last if the behavior hasn't really intensified. So the teacher discusses interfering behavior, the expected behavior, and a plan to ensure future expected behaviors. And then modeling and practice may be needed when you're conferencing with students. And lastly, here are a few tips to implementing the continuum strategies. And I said some of these before, but it's important to repeat. You want to be consistent and respond to misbehaviors each time they occur. And you want to respond using a very calm and respectful tone and demeanor. You want to be specific and brief in what you want students to do. Instead, refer to posted classroom rules and procedures. You always want to increase active supervision. You want to respond privately when needed. And then you may need to refocus the class if needed. Maybe the instruction needs to be stopped and you may need to refocus the whole classroom. So I hope you learned a lot during this PBIS section. I'm now going to stop sharing so that Dr. Lichtman can prepare her part of the presentation.
Hello, everyone. We're now going to begin with behavior, and we're going to talk about different things with behavior. In the first part of behavior, we're going to talk about the functions of behavior and what is going on in the body, especially the brain. So we have 4 functions that we're going to talk about. The first one is escape or avoidance. The second one is attention seeking. The third is tangible objects or events. And the last one is sensory seeking or avoidance. These 4 functions are adopted by JCPS and they go under the acronym of EATS, and it's the first letter of each one of the functions. On the right, you see a man named Mike Lowry. Mike Lowry is not an educator. He actually works in the medical field, and he goes around and he talks about de-escalating in the medical field. And he in particular works with nurses. Nurses have a lot of escalation, just like sometimes we have in school. So he works with the same thing that we do with nurses as we work with and our staff at school. He has summarized that the cause of anger is almost always an unmet need for control, for information, to be listened to be safe or pain-free, and it may have psychological antecedents or be triggered by fear. So there may be some things psychologically that happen beforehand, and it may be triggered by fear. Another person kind of came to the same conclusion, and this man is Dr. Rosenberg, and he came up with a system of how to talk to people that take all the judgment out of what you're saying so people feel more free to talk and express their opinions. He says that at the root of every tantrum and power struggle are unmet needs. So both Lowry and Rosenberg talk about unmet needs. So how does that fit in with the functions that JCPS uses? So if you look at Lowry's bullet points, we're going to try to align those with the 4 functions that Jefferson County recognizes. So escape and avoidance, what you're really trying to do is you're trying to get control of the situation. Say, for example, you have a student that doesn't like math. They're going to try to get control of the situation and get away from math and maybe avoid it. So you see the picture of the child in the picture pushing their papers away. They're angry. They're dropping their pencils. They're trying to get out of doing their math assignment. The second function, attention seeking, Lowry talks about to be listened to. And that's what a lot of our students want. They want to be listened to. They want that attention. The third is tangible object and events. And Lowry talked about information, which is, it's something that you want. You see the picture here of the child. The child was trying to get something and they got it and they ran away. And the last one is sensory seeking and avoidance. And in our JCPS description of sensory seeking and avoidance, it talks about trying to be safe and pain-free. And that's what Lowry talked about. Sometimes something happens and let's say there's a loud noise, and some students it really aggravates, so they might try to get away from that. Or on the other hand, a student might be uncomfortable and they're trying to do something to soothe themselves. And so they're trying to gain a calming sensory atmosphere. So let's talk about what's going on in the body. There's 4 different parts of the brain that we're going to talk about briefly, just to get an understanding here. So we're going to look at the thalamus, and I'm going to read the definition and we're going to just talk just a little bit about each one of these. The thalamus is where the perception center of the brain that interprets the data received from stimulus and creates interpretations or assumptions. So just kind of hone in on it brings in the data. So what does that mean? That means through your senses, seeing or hearing, touching, smelling, tasting, it is bringing in the information and it creates interpretations or assumptions on all that information that your body is bringing in. The amygdala serves as the communicator between the parts of the brain that processes incoming sensory signals and the parts that interpret them, and it can alert the body of an incoming threat and trigger a response of fear or anxiety. So what that means is if the information that is coming into your body through your senses, if the amygdala looks at that and says that is a threatening stimulus, then I'm going to get the body ready for a fear response. And then over on the right side is the cortex. It's more the pink part. That controls the thinking part of the brain. And that's where we want our students. We want them in that thinking part of the brain where they can do math and all the assignments that we give them in school. The last part is the hippocampus, and it's responsible for forming new memories. It is sensitive to cortisol, which is a chemical that is always present in your body. But when the amygdala gets us ready for a threat, we produce more cortisol. And so the brain, especially the hippocampus, is sensitive to the cortisol. And that's when it really sears memories into our brain, because you have that emotion and you have that event that's going on, and it really sears that memory into the brain. So now we're going to talk about behavior and escalated behavior and maybe some strategies for trying to de-escalate students who are escalated. Here we have what's called the escalation curve. And there are 7 phases on the escalation curve. If you start at the left-hand side, you start with calm. So just think of one student in particular. It might make this a little easier to understand. Then something happens and then the student is triggered. So a trigger happens. Then the student might get agitated. And if it keeps going, the escalation keeps going, it goes up to acceleration. It reaches a peak, then it starts to come back down. It de-escalates, and eventually the student comes back down to recovery. So we're going to talk about each one of these phases just slightly. So calm, let's think of a student. Let's identify a student. Let's say her name is Carmen, and Carmen is sitting in her seat. This is exactly where we want all our students. She's calm, her brain is calm, her body's calm. She's sitting there and she's doing all of her classwork just like we want her to do. She's doing her math assignments, she's doing her reading assignments, and then all at once, something happens. Let's say it could be anything. It could be the fire alarm goes off. It could be Carmen hears a door slam across the hallway. Somebody could have stepped into the classroom. Maybe Carmen didn't like that person. Something happened that triggered Carmen's, think about that brain, that maybe triggered Carmen's amygdala. And Carmen, now she's not sitting there doing her work anymore. Maybe she threw her papers on the floor because Carmen is starting to get a little stressed. Maybe she stood up and she said, I'm not going to do this anymore. So Carmen's behavior is in reaction to whatever that trigger was and how that trigger affected Carmen. The next is agitation. So she's not just throwing her papers on the floor anymore. Her body is starting to get agitated. You can see it in her body. Maybe her hands are shaking a little bit, or maybe her legs are kind of bouncing, or maybe she's starting to stand up around her desk and maybe refuses to sit down. If we don't de-escalate Carmen early on, then her behavior may escalate. And then she's going to maybe start walking around the room, and maybe she's going to start agitating other people. Maybe she's going to start saying things to other people. Her face might get more stressed. Her behavior is just a little more accelerated than agitation. Eventually, she's going to go to the peak of her behavior, and the peak of her behavior may be different than the peak of other students. Some students actually become somewhat violent. They might start throwing chairs around the room, or they might start going up and threatening people. Everybody's peak looks a little different. Eventually, that student is going to start calming down, and their behavior is going to start de-escalating. And eventually, they're going to come back down to recovery, and they're going to be back in that calm state again, where we can actually have them working on their subjects. So what does that look like in our students? We had one JCPS student that kind of walked us through what it looks like and what he feels like inside. So look at the bottom in the calm phase. The student said he looked like he was calm, and inside he felt like he was shy. Something happened, and he said he felt like his stomach started turning over and the devil was telling him to do things in his head. My guess and what he meant by that is he started his brain, think about what happens in the brain. His brain probably, the amygdala probably started taking over, and he had all these thoughts in his head at the same time and was very confused. The third phase, agitation, he walked around the room. He was clenching his fist in his jaw. He started crying and he was jittery, but he felt like he couldn't concentrate and he was very angry. Then he went into the acceleration where he started swearing, yelling. He was loud. He was still clenching his fist, but inside he felt sick. When he reached his peak, he was swearing, he was mean, he hit someone, he actually bit someone, which makes me think this is an elementary school student, and he started destroying property. Inside, he said he felt sick, his stomach turned, his head was hurting, his eyes were seeing too much, and his eyes were wide open. Why this is important, sometimes when we are working with students who are escalated, we are only thinking about handling the situation and what it's like for us. Because we have a student who may be somewhat violent. De-escalating actually happens before the violence. Once violence comes in, it's no longer de-escalating. It's more, that's when we have to call our teams to come in and safe crisis management and handle students. But de-escalation, we're thinking about before a student gets to that point. So think before the student gets to that point, what you're thinking of. So we're going to talk about how to maybe flip that around and also add in if we can figure out what the student is thinking and what the student is feeling. To do this, we're going to look at the Crisis Prevention Institute's 10 tip for de-escalation, and they're called CPI. So the rest of the slides will be talking about CPI's 10 tips for de-escalation. I'm going to read through these and then I'm going to talk about each one of them separately. Number 1, be empathetic and non-judgmental. Number 2, respect personal space. Use non-threatening nonverbals. Avoid overreacting. Focus on feelings. Ignore challenging questions. Set limits. Choose wisely what you insist upon. Allow silence for reflection. And allow time for decisions. So tip number 1, be empathetic and non-judgmental. So I've put 3 quotes here that I'm going to read through and then I'm going to discuss these quotes. The first one is Miller's Law. To understand what another person is saying, you must assume that it is true and try to imagine what it could be true of. Let's talk about that. I've spent a couple years in a school where the students had very challenging behaviors, and I was the behavior coach. So my job was to try to de-escalate a lot of different students, and I had other people that worked with me. Sometimes adults don't always believe what the student is saying when they're escalated. What this is trying to say, what Miller's Law is trying to say to us is, stop trying to guess whether the student is lying or telling the truth and assume that the student is telling the truth. Now, this is only during the time that you're trying to de-escalate. So you're trying to de-escalate once there's a trigger that happens and you're trying to make sure they don't get up to any kind of violent peak. So the de-escalation can last sometimes from just a few seconds. Sometimes it can last for a long time because that curve can go on for sometimes 20, 30 minutes. That student can be escalated, and that's not including any violence. They can just be very, very upset, and they can just be very escalated where they can't come back down to calm to focus on their schoolwork. So Miller's Law is trying to say, just assume that what they're telling you is true to them. Remember, it's all about perception, and their perception is saying, this is what is going on to me. So just accept that and try to go on with your de-escalating. Second, our instincts might tell us to react defensively to the level of energy and emotion that someone else is pouring out in front of us. But the best thing we can do is to take a mindful pause, however slight, and realize that we've been there too. And I think that one kind of speaks for itself. You don't want to match the energy of the person that's all escalated. You want to try to stay calm, so that person eventually can match your energy, right? And you want to try to take a mindful pause and just stay in your peaceful place while you're trying to help the other person bring themselves back down to calm. And the last one is, whenever you are about to find fault with someone, ask yourself the following questions. What fault of mine most nearly resembles the one I am about to criticize? It's very easy to look at these students who are starting to get upset and their behavior, which maybe we don't understand why they go to particular behaviors. So instead of judging them, realize that we have thoughts. Every one of us has thoughts too, and we don't want to be judged for our maybe something that is not presented the best in the best light that we do. So we don't want to find fault with them. Just recognize that something happened, they got upset. We're going to try to believe their side of the story while we're de-escalating them. We can always talk about the story later on, but we're talking about de-escalating right now. And for that brief amount of time, we're going to try to assume that they believe what they're telling us. We're going to try to keep our energy calm, have them match our energy and not find fault with them. The second one is respect personal space. I love this slide because it's talking about space, and I put this in kind of a space theme. So in the middle here, you see that space can decrease anxiety and safety. And when you're de-escalating a person, space is one of the most important things that you need to think about. First of all, you always need to watch your back. You should never turn your back on someone who's escalating because you just don't know where that escalation is going to go. So always keep your front to the person and watch what they're doing and protect yourself and watch your back. Secondly, you want to stay at least one leg length apart from the person that's escalated. That gives you time to react in case that escalation goes in a way that you don't want it to. And that way you can get away, or that way you can maybe stop something that's about ready to happen and you're not putting yourself in a vulnerable position. I had a child one time who was called on the radio to come and help with because they couldn't figure out what to do with this child. And I walked into the room and this child was crouched down in a corner and was screaming, and his eyes, it almost scared me because his eyes looked like they were kind of bugging out of his face. And even as stressed as he was, I knelt down in front of him, but I made sure that I kept my distance from him because he was so upset. You just never know if he's going to haul off and try to punch you or if he's going to try to headbutt you. I was able to de-escalate this child within just a minute or two because I had him focus on me. But if I hadn't had at least one leg length apart, he may not have been able to find my face and focus on my face to be able to bring himself back down. Stand and approach at an angle. This is very interesting because we think what we want to do is we want to get right in the person's face, but that's not what we want to do. If the person is at a distance from us and we need to approach that person, if we approach that person face on, then sometimes that can be interpreted as an aggressive approach, and we don't want to approach straight on because we don't want that person to fear that we're coming there to harm them. Nor do we want to approach them from behind, because if we come up from behind them, we might startle them, and you never know what a startled person is going to do. They might just haul off and smack you like this, or like fall back and headbutt you, or you just don't know what they're going to do because they may not know you're coming up from behind them. So you want to come up, but it's not an aggressive approach. And you can continue to de-escalate. You always want to have your hands visible so that the person can see what you're doing. If you don't have your hands visible, they may be worried the whole time about what you're getting ready to do. Are they going to hit me with their hands? Do they have something in their hands that might hurt me? So that you always want your hands visible, and you always really want to see their hands because their hands give you great information on maybe what's coming. Like if they have their hands clenched, you know they're probably still very stressed. Or if they have something in their hand that might harm you, you might be able to keep yourself safe. Tip number 3, use non-threatening nonverbals. The more a person loses control, the less they listen to you and the more they react to your nonverbal communication. Think about that brain again and think about what the boy said when that trigger happened, where the devil started telling him what to do. Your brain gets very confused and that amygdala takes over, and sometimes you don't hear the directions, but you do see things more clearly. So your face expression, you don't want to have a smile on your face because the student might interpret that as you're making fun of them, like they're all upset and you're laughing at them. That's the last thing you want the student to think. You don't want to have a frown on your face and you don't want to have a stressful face. You just want to have a neutral face so they can look at you and see that neutrality and maybe start calming down. Proximity, we already talked about, keeping our distance from the person. The speed of movement, you want to make sure that you're not moving really fast because that fast movement, it might just trigger that brain and that might just escalate that person more because instinctively, sometimes fast moving things are threats. So you want to slow down just a little bit and give them just a little space. Your tone of voice is extremely important. You don't want to talk to them in a mean tone of voice, and you probably don't want to talk to them in a real, like let's go on a picnic kind of voice. You want it to be firm, but you want it to be non-threatening. Your hand gestures, just try to keep your hands, we talked about having them visible, but try to keep them relaxed where they're not really doing anything. They're just relaxed and at your side. You definitely don't want to be doing anything with your hands that's going to signal something to the escalated person that something's wrong. And the last, the manner in which you approach, we talked about. Tip number 4, avoid overreaction. And we talked about this all through here, remain calm and rational and professional. And it's always interesting to think about, you can't control what others do, but you can respond the way you want to respond, right? You can't control them, but you can control the way you respond to that escalated person. Focus on your feelings. Not on your feelings. Focus on the feelings of the person that's escalated. Now, that seems rather strange, right? It seems like you want to focus on what the person's doing, but think about that escalation curve. They're calm, a trigger happens. The trigger happens, but the rest of the students might not get triggered. That one student, Carmen, is getting triggered. Why is she getting triggered? She has a feeling about something that happened. And that feeling is making her, that's what's causing her escalation. So if you can figure out what the feeling is that Carmen or your students are feeling, that's when you can maybe really get to what's happening. And that's when you might be able to de-escalate that person. So during an escalation, an individual is not always thinking and they're not always logical. That's why we want to tap in on the feelings. And we talked about the brain and the triggering. And we always want to make sure that we use active listening and we watch the person to determine what their feelings are. Tip number 6, ignore challenging questions. Now, why do we do that? Well, because when we're de-escalating a person, sometimes going back to those feelings, they come out with all kinds of things. Like, for example, let's say a teacher is trying to de-escalate a student. And that student starts saying things like, well, you never liked me anyway. You always like so-and-so better. How come you don't like me? Well, that's not a question that you want to answer when a student is all escalated. First of all, the teacher probably does like the student, right? So you're going to try to redirect. You're not going to answer all those challenging questions because they can come up with one challenging question after another, and then it just becomes a power struggle. So you're going to try to redirect that student's attention to what they need to do. And how can you do that? Sometimes you can do that with this 3-step approach. You can start with an I student. You can express the facts that you know, and you can try to build their trust. And then you can ask them how they felt about that. So you could say to that student, I'm a little concerned right now because I know that you're stressed, and I'm thinking maybe you were stressed when Mr. whoever walked into the room, and let's see if we can calm down and just sit down in our seat, and then we can talk about it. Is that okay? Does that help? And then the student maybe can answer your question, and maybe that student can sit down and take a couple breaths. And once you get them de-escalated, then you can start talking about some things, but you don't want to answer those challenging questions. Told you that students can only learn when they're in the calm, and we're talking about their subjects in the school, right? So we don't mean that they can't, that this is not to teach. We mean this is not to teach their subjects, but you're going to be teaching them through this whole process how to de-escalate themselves. So hopefully in the future, when they feel a trigger and they feel that feeling, they will know how to bring themselves back down to calm, and they might not need anybody else. I took a psychology class, and one of the things the teacher stressed throughout the entire semester was the most important thing a person can learn to do is to calm themselves down. I didn't understand what she was talking about at the time until the end of the class, and it finally dawned on me, we really can't succeed in almost anything if we don't learn to self-regulate and keep ourselves in calm and learn how to bring ourselves back down. Limits, the individual may have a difficult time listening to what you're saying, so give clear, simple, and enforceable limits. You might not want to say to a child that's all escalated, get back to your work, start doing that math. Look at question number 3, right? So you want to say clear, simple, and enforceable limits. So you might want to say, excuse me, you might want to say, I'm a little worried that you're stressed. Do you think you could just sit down and take a couple of breaths? I'll breathe along with you if you want me to. Something very simple that you can maybe get them to do one little step. So think about what you're asking them to do. Is it something little step by little step that you can get them to do to bring them back down? Choices, you want to give them some choices. And Kenya talked about giving choices in the classroom management that she was talking about. So what kind of choices can you give a student when they're escalated? Well, you could, if the picture on the left, you could see if you can get them to sit, and then maybe you can have them talk and you can listen to what they say. That way they can get out what they need to get out, but they're getting it out in a calmer manner. Maybe you can say, hey, I know you're all upset. How about if we walk to the water fountain together and you can get a drink of water and you can tell me what's going on. The third choice is like arts and crafts, like the little boy that I told you about that was all upset. One of the things I did with him is I'd only known him for a couple of days, but I knew that he liked Play-Doh. So I had someone get me some Play-Doh very quickly. And as I was talking to him, I held the Play-Doh in my hand and I was working with the Play-Doh so he could see it. And one of the things that I offered him after I got him to look at me, because I couldn't get him to look at me for a long time, is I offered him the ability to sit at the table and play Play-Doh while we talked. And after he got himself where he could look at me and focus on me because I remained calm and he could see that calmness, then he was eventually, within a minute or two, able to calm his body down enough where he could take my hand and we went and sat at the table and we worked with that Play-Doh, and I allowed him to talk while he was working with Play-Doh. And if nothing else, you could offer them a seat. How about if we just sit here and then we can, whatever the next step you want it to be, we can talk, I'll allow you some silence. Whatever that next step is, maybe you can just get them to sit down. Tip number 8, choose wisely what you insist upon. So is the rule negotiable or not? Sometimes the rule is not negotiable, like you can't hit people. That's not something you can do. But, well, maybe, I can let you move to the back of the room so that you can calm yourself down. You're the only one that knows if the rule is negotiable or not. Would exhibiting a bit of flexibility head off an altercation? So if you know that you don't give in to this rule, that child is going to escalate beyond escalating, maybe at that moment, you can think of something that's more flexible just to get them to calm down. And then after they calm down, you can always have whatever talk you need to have with that student. But at the moment, you're thinking of safety and trying to de-escalate that student. And so sometimes a little bit of flexibility helps de-escalate that student. Does insisting on something lay the groundwork for a power struggle? And there's where that flexibility comes in. And can you come through with the stated consequences? So when you're de-escalating a person, you don't ever want to talk about consequences, but I've heard people do that over and over again. If you don't be quiet and sit down in your seat, or if you don't stop doing this, you're going to stay for detention after school. Well, you don't know if that student can stay for detention, right? You haven't talked to the parents. You always have to get parent permission for some things. And so you never want to give consequences during de-escalation, but especially you don't want to give consequences that you can't follow through with. Tip number 9, allow silence for reflection. Now, this is something that just goes against what most people think de-escalation is. And it might feel counterintuitive just to stop talking and just to allow silence. But think about a time when you've been all upset and maybe you have somebody in your face trying to tell you stuff and you're just like not wanting to hear any of it. And all you want them to do is just to be quiet and leave you alone, right? Well, sometimes that's what our students need too. They don't need somebody in their face. So you want to give them those simple directions we talked about. And then if you can, you might want to give them some silence just so that they can get their brain to stop hearing all those voices in their brain and they can look at you and see the calm and maybe calm that brain down because they have a little silence to think through all of this and maybe they can get control of themselves and come back down to calm. Tip number 10, allow time for decisions. So look at all the little grains of sand that are in our hourglass here. Kind of reminds me of the hands of time, right? The sands of time. So the first one at the top is have faith in the ability of the escalated person. Everybody needs to know how to de-escalate themselves, right? So have some faith that that person is going to follow through and that so just keep with your strategies and have faith. Truly want them to be able to learn to de-escalate themselves and do what's best for them, they'll figure that out. And especially if it's someone that you work with all the time. And resist the pressure of time to allow the individual the ability to think through their actions, right? So you want to give them that time. You want to give them a lot of gifts when you're de-escalating. You want to give them time. You want to give them silence. You want to give them clear and precise directions. You want to give them a neutral face and a calm voice. These are gifts that you can give to someone when you're de-escalating them. This brings us to the end of our presentation. We want to thank you for being with us today. And remember, one small positive thought can change your whole day. Kenya, would you like to join in and say anything?
Thank you all for listening. And like Dr. Licton said, I just hope that you learned a lot and that you will be able to take these strategies and use them in the classroom and the schools that you're working in. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.